welcome in to this week's book club for Star Wars Aftermath Life Debt. If you don't know what the series is, congratulations, you just joined us for the last episode of this amazing reading. I'm so excited I can't even speak. If you click here, it'll take you back to the beginning of the playlist, so you can start this book with us from the beginning, or you can click on the playlist after it, and we'll take you through the first book in the trilogy. This is the second book in the trilogy. But with that, like I said, we are finishing this book today. I went back and looked at it. We went through this book in about 4 months. We spent 4 months on this book and 4 months on the book prior, and that is just crazy. Again, I want to say a big thank you to all the people who watch every week. Amphisoovie and Ravenroo, I know you guys are in the comments every week, and I know a lot of you watch this pretty regularly, even if you don't always say hi, and I appreciate that so much. But with that, let's finish this book, shall we? Let's talk about it. There's so much story. Like I said, this was going to be largely wrapping up, which is why we kind of read a big chunk all in a go. I'm going to try to lump this together by character, because there's a lot of the characters where their resolution looked like it was going one way, and then it started to go another. So I might read this a little bit out of chapter order and keep it close to the characters. We're going to see. You never know. To be honest, I never script these out, so we'll just see where the moment takes us. But we start with Jazz, and Jazz is still in Kashyyyk. You know, she is looking out over the planet that they just liberated. Everything's fine. You know, there's still a few Imperials that have to get chased off, but it looks like that's gonna happen. You know, there's no more Star Destroyers in space. There's no more Imperial moffs hanging around. And she's done it. She's done her good deed that she needed to do, and so much of this book has been about her struggling with being the good guy, claiming that she's only in it for the money, and then ultimately choosing to do something not for the money, and she's done it, and she doesn't really know what she wants to do now, and she and Sinjir have a really good talk. Jazz ultimately decides she wants out of the good person business and talking to Sinjir. Turns out Sinjir's kind of wants out of that as well. She comes up with a phrase for Sinjir, which is really cool, in what is probably Zabraki, but the phrase is I can't even read my own writing, that makes it even harder. Task Walask Tidan, or a man without a star. That writing I could read. which is an interesting word for Sinjir. Sinjir, of course, has been dealing with loyalty throughout both of these books, trying to figure out who he is. He's not an Imperial anymore, but everything about his Imperial identity is what has helped the Aftermath crew, and it's often what gets used of him. But he doesn't feel like a good person, even though he's desperately been trying to be a good person. In a way, I suppose what Jazz says of Sinjir could probably be true of herself as well. Sinjir just probably doesn't know as many neat little catchphrases like that. But Jazz ultimately decides to walk away from the group, and she decides to break up with Jom. Jom kind of sees it coming, and this time he takes it really well. She's been pushing him away at different points in the novel, and he's always kind of come back to find her, and at this point he's decided to let her go. I think he's gained a lot of perspective from what happened on Kashyyyk, almost dying, losing an eye, that sort of thing. I think he's kind of feeling a cause again, feeling really good, kind of doing something again. He's just gonna let her go, let her do her thing, and Jazz has to kind of figure out what she wants to do. Of course, as we jump ahead, like I said, later in these last few chapters, both Jazz and Sinjir claim they want out, and in fact they go right back in. So just as Jazz has left Jom, Sinjir leaves Condor, and that comes largely out of Sinjir. Sinjir kills the guard that frees Tashu, that killed the other Imperials, that we found out gave weapons to all of the people that were brainwashed. When Sinjir's pretty sure the guy doesn't have any more information, Sinjir just murders him. He doesn't torture him. To his credit, I thought he would have done that. He does kill him in a painful way. But Sinjir murders him in cold blood and has decided at this point that he is not a good person. He wants to walk away. And he leaves Condor. And I think it's so interesting watching Jazz and Sinjir go down these same but different paths. They both leave their significant others. Not that Jazz and Jom were together, but it was certainly heading that way. They weren't in the same way that Sinjir and Condor were. What I really like about their character is that they're two sides of the same coin. They're two halves, but they're not family. and they're not romantic. And I don't mean to slam that, because I do also like it when they're family, and I do also like romance stories when they're told that way. So I'm not dismissing that or saying that this is the superior way to do that, but it's interesting watching them be friends, and you can see that they're very close with each other. Sinjir rests his head on Jazz's shoulder. They have no problem being up close with each other in a physical way, but they're friends, and that's just how it is. And I do like watching that and seeing how they deal with these situations differently. And I think both Jazz and Sinjir leave Jom and Condor because they both are at a point where they hate themselves. They tried so hard to do something good, and that in doing this good thing, that they could find this good identity, right? That this one good deed could wash away their sins of everything that they've done in the past. For Jazz, I think she just gets there and realizes it's not true. For Sinjir, he gets there and then murders someone because he's angry, because he doesn't know how to deal with friendship, and the shame of that causes him to leave Condor, even though it's both what Sinjir's saying and isn't what he's saying. But I think both of them are at a point where they don't know who they are, what they see they don't like, they don't know how to handle that, and they don't like being with somebody that makes them feel good because they don't feel like they deserve to feel good. And I think that's what both these characters are dealing with. They're dealing with it for different reasons from different paths, but it's the same thing. And I like seeing this same journey through two different lenses, if that makes sense. But like I said, they ultimately end up back with Nora, as we see towards the end there, that Nora is going to restart the team that we see at the beginning of the book to try to hunt down Ray Sloane. But we'll get there in a minute. Coming back to chapter 35 for a second, we see Han and Chewie and Leia dealing with the effects of what just happened on Hosnian Prime. So Leia talks about how she feels happy. She thinks she shouldn't feel happy. She thinks she should feel in danger. I mean, she's a pregnant woman on a dangerous planet that was surrounded by Imperials. She shouldn't feel good. At least she doesn't think she should. But she does. She's back to doing what she knows best. She's with her husband. She's with Chewbacca, who she does care about Chewbacca. Maybe not as much as Han. Certainly not in the same way that Han does. But she does care. I think Leia's feeling good. And she has this moment, too, of we just did this good thing. And then she looks at what happened on Hosnian Prime. She hears about it. And there's an interesting dynamic there, because on the one hand, if she was there, she could have died, or Ben could have died. Certainly, but she wasn't. So she did this wrong thing. She did this wrong thing for the right reasons, and she's going to kind of have to wrestle with what this means now that she's somebody who's left. Leia, of course, realizes she has to go to Chandrila. Sorry, I was calling it Hosnian Prime. I've got resistance on the brain. She realizes she has to go back to Chandrila because of problems. I was also confused. We're going to read later in the book that the planet has been destabilized, and they're considering moving the planet, and of course they are moving the capital, and they of course move the capital Hosnian Prime. So sorry about that. I do that a lot in these videos. Leia hears about what happened on Chandrila, and she has to go back. And Han decides to go back with her, that he's done his thing that he needed to do. And this is a big important point for them. And what I really like seeing about this is I like seeing Han as actually caring and actually being a good husband. I mean, there's an argument that this entire book was him being a bad husband. But Han is not a bad guy. And while he can be self-centered, he's not that self-centered, I guess, is the best way to put it. So I like seeing that he can recognize, okay, he did his thing, now is his time to go back and be a husband and a father. And now that's the thing he has to do. And I think it's important to note that so much of, presumably, what happened in Ben Solo's life that led him to being Kylo Ren, I would say could be tied back to, presumably, he had two very famous parents who would have been very busy and maybe weren't the most attentive and didn't know how to handle him with the different things he was going through. We haven't necessarily had that spelled out for us, but I think it's a pretty logical line of thought to follow. And while I think that's a thing, and while I think that's pertinent, I don't think that Han and Leia were bad people. I think they were normal people who did the best they could, and they just weren't enough. And that's a reality that hits a lot of parents and a lot of children. And so I like seeing this because I think it's important to show that Han and Leia try, even if they're not always right. And then you have the scene where Han and Chewbacca say goodbye. And a really important part about this is Chewbacca is willing to come back with Han, and Han has to tell him no, and that's a real testament to the bond between Han and Chewie. You could chalk it up to the Wookiee concept of a life debt, but I think it goes deeper than that for Chewbacca. I think to Chewbacca, he and Han are family. In Chewbacca's mind, he wouldn't be leaving family behind. In his mind, letting Han go is letting family go. And that's how bonded they are. But of course, this is something that's temporary. Han has to go deal with his family on Chandrila, while Chewie wraps up things on Kashyyyk. And that's just important, and I think they know it's not a goodbye forever, but it is definitely a hard goodbye, because it's not one that they would have had potentially even since they met. I'm gonna skip talking about chapter 40 for right now and go to 41, just so we can kind of finish talking about the good guys, and then we'll wrap up by talking about the bad guys. So as I was saying, the New Republic is gutted. There's many important people who are hurt or dead or thought dead. They're thinking about moving the planet's capital from Chandrila to Hosnian Prime. And Timon is really, really broken. Like, he's so full of anger, he doesn't really know what to do with it. Wedge is trying to help him. At this point, Timon figures out that Wedge kind of has a thing for his mom, and he has to deal with that because he's also dealing with the fact that his dad is some sort of, like, brainwashed assassin. And Timon's just dealing with a lot that's way too much for someone his age to be dealing with. And it's not helped much because the people who need to be helping him through it are dealing with it themselves. You know, his father's not there and brainwashed. His mother is dealing with the fact that her husband is not there and brainwashed. And anytime you have somebody who's central in a family like that, that's where it gets so much more painful, because the people who you need most are the people who also need you the most. And a bunch of empty people just have nothing to give each other. That's perpetually the case between Timon and Nora. And it's frustrating to watch because you so badly want them to be there for each other, but I can also understand how they just can't right now. Ultimately, the group, like I said, gets back together. One neat little shout out about Jazz is Jazz was considering going to Kanata's castle. So that's a shout out to Maz Kanata, but she ends up joining up with Nora, and they want to go out after the biggest bounty of them all, the one they never got, which is Rey Sloane. Of course, they may not get money for this. Leia shows up, says she'll back them, but she doesn't have the political capital she used to have, so she can't necessarily do everything for them, but she's going to help them as much as she can, because at this point they all want Sloane, and they all want to get rid of Sloane. And again, I always think this conflict is so interesting, because they so badly want Sloane, and Sloane doesn't give a crap about any of them. Sloane wants Rax, and so it's this weird kind of dog chasing a dog scenario. But that's really where we leave the characters, is so many of them are broken, so many of them are lost, so many of them just don't know what they want. And we're going to see where their stories pick up in Empire's End. But now let's go back to chapter 40, and we're going to discuss the bad guys. So Sloane wakes up on a ship that she has stolen, just a small ship. She thinks she's alone, turns out she's not. Brenton has stolen aboard. So this is where we really start to see more from Brenton's point of view. We really haven't had any of it up to this point, because they didn't, Wendig didn't want to show us that he was brainwashed. So it's kind of interesting to see Brenton dealing with this, seeing what someone is dealing with post this incident happening. And Sloane is so close to death, and yet so badly wanting revenge. And this is a really cool team up, because when I was reading this, I never would have expected a Sloane and Brenton team up, but they're two people that are completely exiled. They don't have anything. Sloane wants her empire back, but she's completely alone. She's been betrayed by everybody who's supposed to help her. Brenton is somebody who's betrayed everyone he was supposed to help. So again, they're kind of opposite sides of the same coin, and ultimately end up being the people that need each other more than they know. Sloane gets one last favor called in from Mercutio Swift, who sends them along to Jakku, which we already know that Rax is from Jakku because of the prologue, but they now learn this, and they start heading that way. As they start heading to Jakku, Rax starts leading his fleet to Jakku. So he's now done his big Chandrila attack, and he's going to head in and do this big thing that he's been talking about and kind of go into his end game. And we still don't know what that is. As I was reading this, I really wondered if Rax knows that Sloane hates him now or not. What is his opinion of Sloane? Because Ada would have ratted her out, but Ada's dead. So what does Sloane know at this point? I kind of wonder. But one of the two interesting things he talks about is how, one, Jakku is going to be a proving ground for the remainder of the Empire, and the other interesting thing is that only Brindle Hux is important and that no one else is. So Rack still has a lot of tricks up his sleeve that we don't really know. Sloane and Brenton make their way to Jakku. They arrive on Jakku. They talk to a bartender there, and the bartender is the same guy who shows up on Jakku in the 15th interlude of the first book. So there's a guy named Corwin who is trying to get away from war. He goes to Jakku. The bartender there is like, everything's dead here. I don't know why you came here. Corwin became a bartender there. He's talking to Sloane and Brenton. And then a bunch of Star Destroyers show up, and war has come to Jakku. So things are not working out particularly well for that bartender, but the plot is getting particularly interesting for us. Then we hit the epilogue, and the epilogue is young Galley on the ship that he stowed away on. He thinks he's going to be chased down by the man he saw, and instead he's chased down by who we find out is Emperor Palpatine, who should be then Chancellor Palpatine. And at this point we learn more so that Palpatine is really, really interested in Jakku, that there's some kind of ancient importance there at Jakku, and that they're going to start building something there. And he puts Galley in charge of protecting it. So his whole job, his whole existence is to kill if he has to, but defend this area that's going to be on Jakku, and we're going to learn what that is in this upcoming book. The line that I think is really interesting here is Palpatine says, an emperor must have friends. And if I follow the timeline correctly, he should be Chancellor. So I just think it's kind of interesting that he's already referring to himself as emperor there. But boy, was that a lot. Okay, so that's kind of the sum up of what's going on. This book was so good. I like these books better as they go. So I like Life Debt more than Aftermath. I like Empire's End more than Life Debt. I feel like Life Debt didn't have the same kind of pacing issues that the first Aftermath book had. And to that, I mean, a lot of what's in the first Aftermath book felt a little bit repetitive, or like we held on something for too long. I really noticed it as I started to break down chapters, and it was just the same theme or the same angst every single time. This book didn't seem to have that. There was a much more clear character arc, and in fact more of like a character swiggle as they were kind of vacillating back and forth. I thought that was interesting. I liked seeing more of the New Republic politics. I liked seeing the pomp and circumstance of this supposed peace agreement. There's just a lot going on in this book that I really think helps to cement what the galaxy is like right after Return of the Jedi, which can help inform us on what the galaxy is like when we get up a couple of decades when we hit the sequel trilogy. But I suppose we can finally officially return Life Debt to the shelf and pull Empire's End off the shelf. So next week we will start Empire's End. And you know, if you think about that Star Destroyer on the cover and think about the fact that we are on Jakku and we are being told that war has come to Jakku, that should tell you that you may have seen this particular Star Destroyer before. So I'm very excited to dig into this. We will get into it next week. For next week, let's read this. It's basically a scroll, but it's not. Read the little thing there at the beginning. Read the prelude and chapters 1 and 2. So basically read the start of the book through chapter 2. That is what we will discuss this week. A little note as we go forward. We're coming up on Star Wars Celebration Chicago, if you're watching these videos as they come out. It's my goal to not take a week off for Celebration Chicago and to actually get ahead of you guys 1 week and have a video just ready to upload. That's my goal. I don't know if it's going to happen just because I have a lot to do before I go to the convention. Worst case scenario, we'll take a week off. I will let you guys know on Twitter, Instagram, and Discord if I do end up taking a week off. So this is a great time to plug those socials. Make sure you're following us there because it's the best way to get updates on this series and all the videos we're doing as a whole. And with that, thank you guys again for being with me through all of Life Debt. I'm excited to get into Empire's End, and I will talk to you guys next week.